Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. This is such an exciting day. I can hardly wait. This is the big reveal. Those of you that are already on our Facebook page know that we have a brand new freeze dryer, which we will reveal in just a moment. But we're right here in my hobby room, and now my hobby room is for freeze drying. So we will have the big reveal when we come right back. Here it is, right here. So, here's the reveal. Ta-da! Okay, so I really loved doing that. My babies were born 40 to 50 years ago, and the big reveal at that time was at birth. So I never did have any one of those fun gender reveal parties with balloons and everything, and besides, this is genderless, but we have named it. Its name is Kelvin. Kelvin, after the Kelvin temperature scale that starts at absolute zero, which is about negative 460 degrees. Now, this does not get down that cold, but I thought it would be fun to just name it Kelvin. And this is my data book. I always keep data on things, and so I'll share that with you in just a moment. And so this is our freeze dryer, and we just absolutely love it. These are the foods that we have done so far. This is some shredded pork for making pork carnitas. This is shredded cheddar cheese. I love how this looks in the jar. Doesn't this look just like a party in a jar? This is tricolor sweet peppers, and they're just light and feathery. This is about 6 dozen eggs. We froze dry them raw, and we've been actually enjoying them for the last few mornings, and they just do beautifully. And then these are onions, chopped onions. And I have a sample of each one in these jars, and we're going to take these in the kitchen in a little bit, and we will reconstitute them, because I have not reconstituted these 4 things yet. So we'll get right to that. Now I want to talk a little bit about freeze drying and what is involved in that. So, as I mentioned on our Facebook page, I have been studying and watching these freeze dryers for over 5 years. I wanted one for 5 years. I waited for the price to come down, for the technology to improve. And one thing that we have, which is really great, is we have this oil-less, in other words, without oil, pump. Because that was one of the big things that troubled so many people in the beginning. And I just didn't even want to mess with it. So this is an oil-less pump that goes with our harvest right. And so this little pad is for extra insulation, and then there are 4 trays that are slots for 4 trays right here, and you just slip your food in, and the software is so easy. It prompts you to do everything right here, and the results are pretty amazing. Now, I want to talk about how freeze drying works, because it's different, very different than dehydrating. First of all, let's go through the 3 processes and rank them in order in terms of how much of the quality of the food is preserved. Well, at the top you have freeze drying, where about 90% of the food value is preserved in this process of freeze drying, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Then under that you have dehydrating, a different process. Dehydrating drives the moisture out with heat, and it shrinks the food down to little hard kernels. And that preserves about 60% of the food value. And then you have regular canning, and that's what I do most of the time, is regular canning. And that preserves about 40% of the food value. And from my perspective, I'm glad to have all 3 available, because I love redundancy systems. I'm going to keep canning, even though it doesn't preserve as much of the food. We will be so grateful to have whatever we have if the time comes when our lives depend on it. Now here's how a freeze dryer works. And so I'm actually going to start a batch today. I have avocados that are in our regular freezer. We have learned that we want to start off the food in the freeze dryer with frozen food. And so they're out in our other freezer, and I'll bring those trays in and we'll get a batch started at the end of this video. So what happens is, the first thing that this freeze dryer does when the trays are loaded in, the door is closed, and it goes on, is that it lowers the temperature and lowers it and lowers it until about, it's 30 below, 40 below, so really, really cold. And so what happens to the food there is that the water molecules separate themselves from the rest of the matrix of the food. The food is all around it, but these molecules of water, as they freeze, they are separated from the rest of the food. So they're in isolation. And then the pump kicks on. This is a vacuum pump that sucks all the air out of this cylinder right here and creates a low pressure environment. And in that low pressure environment, then they raise the temperature to what happens with those frozen solid little molecules of water is that they sublimate, which means they go directly from a solid to a gas without going through the liquid state on their way. And so as it sublimates into that water vapor, the water vapor then turns into ice and sticks to the sides of the machine. And it builds up like in the olden days when we had to defrost our refrigerators and freezers in our old type refrigerators. Well, that's what happens on the inside here. And then after it's sublimated most of the water out, the third stage is the final dry, which takes usually about 10 hours. And so that's elevating the temperature once again up to 130, 140, and it drives the rest of the water completely out. I want to demonstrate one really cool thing that this freezer does, because the different processes are heating and cooling and vacuuming. And it combines those three in that sequence that I just explained to you. But what if I just wanted to use the vacuum part so that I can vacuum seal the jars and I don't have to use my other vacuum sealer? Well, you can do that, and I'm going to show you how. The first thing that you do is you pull this seal off, and it just comes right off. Easy peasy. And then you just pull this unit out. And I'm going to disconnect this quick disconnect and tuck this back in. Now, I'm going to take, this is the size of the trays, and I have a little liner. This is an oven liner, and it's material that you cut yourself, very inexpensive to line these trays with so the food doesn't stick to them. But I don't need the liner with what I'm going to do, because I could not put the jars in there like that because it's not a level surface. This is a cylinder. So I'm going to make a level surface using one of the trays. Now, this is one that we did yesterday, and I saved it for today so that I can show you. So the lid, I've already wiped the rim. The lid is just loosely on here. I'm going to put the ring on, and I'm not going to tighten it down. It's just so that the air can be pulled out of that. So I'm going to put that in there. Okay. And I'm just going to put this on for good measure. We don't want any air sneaking in. Then, up here in the left-hand corner, I'm going to press this little leaf, and it brings up functional testing. And I am going to hit vacuum. Turn it on. And the vacuum pump just came on. It vacuumed for 2 minutes. I turned it off, and then I released the vacuum, because you can't open the door if it's all the air is sucked out. And so there's a hose at the back, and I'll demonstrate all of that on another video, but I had to release the vacuum so air could get back in, so then I can now open it up. So let's check our jars. And I really don't think this thing is necessary. I think I could leave it off for next time. So Very sealed. Yep. Wow, yes, pull the way in. Nope. I'll do that one again. And yes. And yes. And these we can tighten way down. No more finger tight stuff. You can just really get your whole wrist into it, because you want these to keep, if they might, for 30 or 40 years. The next step is to get this all back together, because we're going to start a new batch. So I will pull the seal off, reconnect the shelving unit till it clicks, and then put this back in. Put the seal back on, cushion in place, I'm going to start this, and it's going to be a little noisy, so once the noise comes, we won't be able to hear very well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to prepare this. This has to cool down to at least 30 degrees, 32 degrees, get all cold inside, because then we will bring those avocado trays in here and put them in. Meanwhile, it takes about 30 minutes. We are going to go back into the kitchen and we'll reconstitute these and maybe cook up some eggs. Then we'll be back to put the avocados in. So here's what happens. We're going to start. Do not mix frozen with non-frozen trays. We're going to start with pre-frozen. Meet you back in the kitchen. We're back in the kitchen now, and I have our dehydrated foods right here. Now the cool thing about this, these peppers, my gosh, they're so light. They're just, these stay nice and light and puffy. And so you can even eat these just raw. I actually quite like them raw. But I wonder what it would be if we reconstituted them. So to reconstitute, we just add a little bit of water and let them sit. So I fully think, I'm going to demonstrate scrambled eggs here in just a minute, and I fully think that what I could do, and I'm going to try this at some point, is to reconstitute the eggs, and while they are reconstituting, I could just add some dry onions and dry peppers and even some dried cheese, add a little extra water, and then do that as a scrambled mix. You know what? Let's do that. And then I can do the other here. So with the eggs, these eggs, they just turn out to be crystals. And so these are freeze-dried raw eggs, and they are little crystals. They glint in the light, and so it has taken a little bit of experimenting for me to figure out what the ratio is of water to egg. So I just put in 2 tablespoons of egg. Well, they were heaping, and I'm going to put in 4 tablespoons of water. And then let's just throw in some of these dry onions for kicks, and some dried peppers. And we'll have a nice little scramble here in a minute, and a little bit of cheese. See how this works. Okay. And this looks like it's too runny, so I'm just going to add some more egg. And so I've been experimenting like this. There are different opinions all over the internet, but it needs to sort of look like eggs, at least, and not be more runny than real eggs are. Some people do 1-to-1. Some people do one amount of egg to 2 amounts of water, and I usually go somewhere in between. Still too runny. Well, those others are going to absorb. So let's just now reconstitute these and see what we get. So I'm just going to pour some water in these. And with this meat, when I use this for an evening meal sometime, as I cooked these in my Instant Pot, getting them ready for freeze drying, and it made wonderful broth, and I was able to can 4 pints of that broth. Now, I have never I don't know how to reconstitute this. This is purely a trial and error. So I'm just going to put a little bit of cheese. What we don't want is really gucky cheese. So I'm going to try to keep the water to a minimum. All right, I have cooking spray in the bottom. Here's our eggs. And if you look at this really close, you can see the little, in the liquid, the egg looks just like egg. We'll wait till this heats up just a bit. You could also do an omelet. It cooks just like scrambled eggs. So I think the onions are done. The texture of reconstituted onions is a little bit different than fresh onions. They are spongy. Taste is good. I think most of the time I will probably just throw these in their dehydrated state. Now for the peppers, let's see how they did. Not like fresh. Taste is good. They also are spongy. Probably best thrown in like we did with the scrambled eggs. Now look at this meat. The meat looks great. It tastes perfect, just like the day that I cooked it. So this is wonderful. And now the cheese. Cheese has not reconstituted yet. They're brittle still. Crunchy. Tastes good. Let's leave this a little bit and we'll come back in a little bit. I'm going to run out and check Kelvin to see if the temperature is up to what we need for it to be. Here are our avocados. These are 12 avocados, great big old ones. And I've done them in two ways. I've done 3 trays of just the slices. These are dipped in lime juice to help preserve the browning, although it didn't help in some of these cases. And then I made a big batch of guacamole. I'm going to see how they do. And I put the guacamole in these 3 ice cube trays so that I could freeze it in lumps instead of a whole flat sheet of it. And I had some left over, so I just did some dollops. And of course, everything is frozen solid. So with these ice cube trays, I just twist these, if I had the strength that I used to have. And the bottoms are, you can just punch the bottoms and they just come right out. Okay, so I'm going to lie them on their side because they're a little shorter. Okay, so, we're down to 18 degrees. And it's reminding us to load the fruits into the freeze dryer and to close the drain valve. I have already closed the drain valve, and these just go in right here. We'll put our guacamole in the middle. And the last one. I have no idea how long this is going to take. I'm guessing it will be more than 24 hours. We're not going to come back when it's done. We're going to close out the video here. And at a later time, we'll show you how those turned out. Okay. Now, the other thing we have to do is we've done these 2 things. So we just hit continue. And this is the cooler, It is now still freezing. It'll go down to about 30, maybe even 40 below. So it's still going down, 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 down. All right, so this was our big reveal. We're so excited to have this. It's a brand new way for us to preserve food. We're still just learning. And so if you have hints about how to reconstitute some of the things that we did over in the kitchen, please add them to the comments. And we appreciate all the help we can get as we start on this brand new, exciting journey with Kelvin. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.